Christian Voice official page, and you'll be able to catch the link. And then those of you that would want to catch us via YouTube, look for Lorenzo Entertainment TV, LAT, and then you'll be able to get to connect with us right on that very platform as well, as you get to have your comments on this particular topic. Today, we're looking at a very interesting discussion, and we anticipate that you will participate. What are the options of developing and supporting mining investments in Zambia? Our focus of attention is on mining for today, and there's been a lot that has been discussed and talked about. Gold in Kasanseli, all right, shareholding stakes between the ZCCM Investment Holdings, in the consolidated gold company investment, and so on and so forth, and copper generally, because we definitely wouldn't want to focus on gold and forget about copper. All right, so we anticipate that you'll be able to join us in interaction and send your comments right on the program. All right, I have a very special guest on the program. He's the Private Sector Development Association chairperson. That's Mr. Yusuf Dodia. Welcome to the program, sir. And how have you been?
It's great to be here, Lorenzo. Thank you very much. I've been very well, and we're all wearing masks and sanitizing and trying to keep social distancing. And we're trying to see how we can bring life back to the new normal, which is really taking the COVID-19 pandemic as part of the challenges of daily life.
Absolutely.
And managing it. But otherwise, things are looking bright.
All right, let me start with the wildcat before we get to talk about what we have on the program today, which is options of developing and supporting mining investments in Zambia. All right, we appreciate those of you that are joining us already. Andrew Samba, you're saying you're following from Lumwana Mine. Please, Andrew, I'll be waiting for a contribution. We're discussing something that is close to your heart because you're in Lumwana Mine. All right, and then Isaiah Moya says connected from Kitwe. We have Hilda Malama from Chawama, Wisdom Makwembo from within the mass media area. And then I also have Ingotu Mandamena who says good morning to you too, Ingotu. Then Movanga Kennedy Chilumba, you're following from Chipata, that's in Eastern Province. All right, Mona Lisa Haundu, thank you for tuning in as well. Okay, and then so keep your comments coming through as we get interactive. All right, a wildcard for today, Mr. Dodio. Oil prices are at a ridiculously low price of, is it less than $30 a barrel? And there have been cries from stakeholders and members of the public that why can't the ERB reduce the fuel pump prices? But there was a response from the Minister of Energy, if I'm not mistaken, a while ago, who said he still has old stock and therefore cannot reduce fuel prices to commensurate to what is currently obtaining on the ground. And then the former Minister of Finance, that's Ngando Magande, wondered how the minister could claim that there's still old stock when one of the people that contracted the coronavirus at the border in Nakonde was a driver of one of those fuel tankers.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, let's look at some clear indicators. Is that we are looking at oil prices not dropping yesterday. Oil prices were at around 80 to 100 US dollars per barrel more than a year ago. And in the whole of 2019, the prices were coming down. They continued to drop until now in 2020, when we see oil prices went even to below $20 a barrel, where they went into negative prices. And of course, they started to come up slightly, but they are still extremely low. Now, generally, as a country, our fuel stocks tend to be 1 or 2 months supply. So when oil prices started dropping at the beginning of 2019, we have got almost a year and a half of low oil prices, which in my view should have resulted in low fuel prices in Zambia. The challenge we seem to have in our country is we always milk the low-lying fruits as much as possible. As a nation, we are not necessarily trying to work hard. We are trying to work smartly, but in working smartly, what we are doing There's a lot of damage to our economic growth opportunities and capacities. And one of these things that we tend to do is we look at where is it easiest to make money as a nation. It's easiest to make money as a nation to charge on utilities that every Zambian needs. So fuel prices is a very easy one. When government just starts to put taxes and levies and what have you on fuel prices, the money pours in. And I believe that that is where our oil and fuel prices are going up, because in the rest of the world, all the fuel prices have come down. In Zambia, we are still paying for fuel at prices when it was 80 to 90 US dollars per barrel, when now the price is, as you were saying earlier, below $20 a barrel. There's totally no acceptable or logical explanation for high fuel prices in Zambia. The sad thing about it is, yes, it may be able to generate revenues for government so that government can finance the budget through this revenue collection, which has nothing to do with whether you are making a profit, whether your business is operating viably. It's to do with consumption. You, as long as you use fuel, you'll be paying the fees and the levies that government will collect. And this is the same thing with electricity. We're doing exactly the same thing with electricity, with the ZESCO tariffs. So the bad side to it is, yes, government can collect revenues, but what government is also doing in this mechanism is really depressing the ability for this economy to develop. Because with high fuel prices, with high electricity tariffs, you are talking of a high cost of doing business environment, which means most of our factories will be failing to operate competitively, to produce competitively, and they end up closing down their factories and beginning to become warehouses for imported goods that can be sold in our markets. And this is not the first time we are seeing it. In the towards the end of the 1980s, we saw the same thing. When you look at Ndola, you had Vitafoam, you had No Group Plastics, you had a lot of manufacturing companies in Ndola. The whole of that area where the Ndola Trade Fair grounds is, we had huge companies there manufacturing drugs. There was Swap spinning mills. There was the medicine factories. What was it? Gamaco that was making drugs. But they all had to close down. And the reason they closed down is exactly because of the same phenomena that we are beginning to experience now, where it was cheaper to import the product than to manufacture it in Zambia. It was cheaper to import the product than to add value to it in Zambia, because the cost of doing business in Zambia was so high. So most of these properties in Ndola just ended up becoming warehouses for storage of imported goods. And look where we are in Ndola today. It became a ghost town in the 1990s. And even now it has struggled to pick up. And we're talking about now 20, 25 years later, we are seeing the effects of what happens when you undermine domestic development, domestic industry, and your own industries from being able to become competitive with not only foreign industries, but even regional industries. So I think we should try to avoid this and really go back to the drawing board and look at energy prices, both fossil fuels, which is your kerosene, diesel, and petrol, which we need to fuel our economy. Basically, you know, we are landlocked, therefore goods have to be transported into the country and goods have to be transported out of the country. And also, of course, the electricity tariffs, which tend to feed our industry in terms of machinery. It's a huge challenge to take a step back, look at it, and come up with a strategy that is going to help to develop domestic industry. Because the strength of our economy, the reliability of our economy is going to be based on how strong our domestic economy is in terms of manufacturing, in terms of other trade and commerce activities, which end up financing our national budget. The 2020 national budget is about 30% supposed to be funded from foreign finances and grants. Now, the world has gone into recession, economic recession, because of COVID-19. Do we seriously expect our developing partners out there to ignore their own people and give money to Zambia? Probably not. So definitely, we need to do a budget restructure and say, you know what, we need to remove 30% from our budget. We're expecting to come from outside. It will not come. Let us rewrite our budget to be 30% lower in terms of expectations and in terms of the monies that we need to spend in 2020.
All right, one more World Cup before we talk about mining investments, all right, in this country. Now, there's some stakeholders also that have expressed concern that there hasn't been any statement coming through from the Ministry of National Planning, all right, concerning what have of COVID-19 has wreaked on the economy. In so far as Vision 2030 and the 7th National Development Plans are concerned. Because you say the world economy is in recession, all right? Yeah. Now, there's so many sectors that have been affected by COVID-19. But for some reason, we are quiet on Vision 2030 and the 7th National Development Plan, despite having been affected by COVID-19 as much as any other parts of the world. Do you believe we need to revise these two policy documents going forward with COVID-19 here to stay?
Yes, I think we need to. Generally, when you find us as a nation finding it difficult to make a comment on whether it's the National Development Plan, whether it's interest rates in the banks, you've noticed that the Bank of Zambia had, there was a gap of maybe a month or even more than a month or a couple of months where the Bank of Zambia were not talking about monetary policy rates until very recently when the governor made a presentation. You know, when you see the government and government machinery, state enterprises keeping quiet, it just means that they have no answers. You know, it's very difficult to deliver good news when there's no good news to deliver. And so I think that, yes, we need to go back and look at our 7th National Development Plan, look at our longer term strategy, which is, you know, the 2030 vision, Vision 2030. It doesn't mean that we need to change it. It just means that we need to restructure it. How do we get there? The goals are the same. But the question is that with the challenges of COVID-19 and other challenges that we get in the economy, we have to re-strategize the mechanism on how we get there. And I think that this is really something that National Planning and Ministry of Finance, Commerce and Industry, in fact, the mainline ministries, economic ministries, need to get together and sit down and begin to refocus our strategic plans so that they can be more realistic and they can take into account the challenges that we face. But I mean, you know, if we look at just a little bit of an ironic situation we find ourselves in, we have interest rates running at what, 13-14%? Inflation is running at 13-14%, and yet we are talking of a monetary policy rate of 9%, 9.25. You know, the two just don't add up. You can't be talking of an inflation rate which is at 13-14%, and then you are suggesting that the monetary policy rate should be lower than inflation. It doesn't add up. But, you know, it might be just a call to the banking sector to say, can you lower your margins on your interest rates? Because most banks are looking at minimum of 25, 26%, and going up as high as 35% when the inflation rate is running at around 13-14%. So really, what the Bank of Zambia is crying out to the banking industry is, can you lower, if inflation is running at 13-14%, bring your interest rates down to maybe around 20%. You still have a spread of about 6-7% of profit for your industry. But in itself, we need to appreciate that there's nobody who can lend out money lower than the inflation rate. So these are the difficulties that we find ourselves in, that so, you know, the global economy, the global recession, has impacted on our economy, and some of our regulatory bodies now begin to find it difficult to advise or even propose a way forward without basically saying to industry, lower your margins, make less money. You were making better money last year, make less money this year, work harder this year so that we can strengthen our economy to allow you to make better profits in future years to come. I think that is basically the message under all this. So this is one of the reasons why we're seeing that it's a bit difficult for some of these bodies to make statements because it's very difficult to back up these statements with positive responses. I think what economic recession means, and in this case we're going through a global economic recession, it means that everybody must work harder, everybody must be prepared to earn less and have a lower standard of living in the short term until the global economy and national economies begin to pick up, and then you can be able to improve your lives and just improve the economic environment. And I think this is really where we are.
Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about the mining policy in Zambia. All right. And we're going to now, in our discussion of the mining policy in Zambia, we'll probably narrow down to some of the concerns that have been raised concerning gold and so on and so forth. All right. Because our point of discussion this morning is options of developing and supporting mining investments in Zambia. Now, I believe, Mr. Doja, that with me, I believe everything rises and falls on what policy a given government creates for what sector. And now we're discussing mining here. And I want us to pick it up from a policy perspective. What do you make of the Zambian mining policy as we look at the sector from a general point of view?
Okay, the Zambian mining policy, in my view, is quite in a state of confusion.
Okay.
And beyond the policy, it's also the provisions that have been made on managing the mining industry. There's quite a lot of confusion, and maybe understandably so, because mining has been sort of the big milking cow since before independence. So if you look at what Zambia has relied on in the last 55 years of independence, is that we've relied on farming, which is commercial farming and peasant farming, to feed the people of the country. And that's why we've been very strong on the development of agriculture since independence. And we've also focused a lot on the mining industry, which was in place, in the early 1900s, 40, 50 years before independence. And these are the two major economic and social activities that have taken place in Zambia and dominated our economy over the last 55 years and more. And to a large extent, the mining industry was dominated by foreign investors, basically from Europe. Anglo-American Corporation dominated mining in Zambia, probably from the time ZCCM was privatized to the time when we went into the free market economy in 1991. And basically what we had is the mining industry was dictating the policies and dictating how it should be managed. And by default, that is a completely wrong relationship to have. You cannot have the person you are supervising to dictate to you how you should supervise them. And this has been on from the very beginning. And we have not changed that. We have had attempts to change it. I do remember you brought up the issue of former Finance Minister Magande. I do remember in his days as Finance Minister, he was very focused on cancelling those what we call development agreements in the mining sector, where mining companies were having 20 years, 30 years tax-free holidays, and
Tax holidays.
yes, and even clauses that says the government shall not introduce any new taxes over this period, meaning putting in assurances that government could not change its mind. And so, the question you asked yourself is, the mining industry is where the wealth of the nation is, but that wealth is somehow not going into, not helping the economy to develop. And I'm choosing my words very correctly, carefully, because you are saying foreign hands, and I'm not saying that. I'm saying if you bring in a foreign investor, you have agreed that you want some foreign investor to take over. You cannot say, I'm bringing in a foreign investor, but it must be in Zambian hands. I mean, you can't. That is not a business way of doing things. But what you can say is to say mining assets and resources belong to the nation. You have an investor, whether it's a foreign investor or a domestic investor, who are going to extract those resources. And those resources, from a business point of view, belong to that investor. But from a national point of view, the resources belong to the economy. Now, I seem to be contradicting myself, but it's not a contradiction. What basically we are saying is to say the copper in the ground belongs to the country. The one who's mining it takes custody of that copper in the ground, and it belongs to them from the point of view of extracting it from the economy and selling it outside. But in order for it to continue to belong to the country, once you've sold it, that dollar, that euro, that pound that you get for the copper that you have exported should come into a Zambian bank so that it belongs to Zambia again. In other words, you have taken copper from the country and you've replaced the copper with foreign currency in the banks. That way, the copper still belongs to the country, albeit that money, dollar money, is not in the account of GRZ, it's in the account of this copper mine, that copper mine, whatever copper mine which is mining, it is in their accounts in Zambian banks. Now, the question somebody would ask is, no, then it's still in the hands of the foreigners. No, it is not. Because that copper money sitting in a Zambian bank can now be given to Zambians. When you want to go and build a block of flats and you go to Zanaco and say, I want a loan, you are getting the copper money to build those flats. So as long as that money is sitting in a Zambian bank, it belongs to Zambian people. And as that money is being depleted, being used for various things, then yes, it's going to Japan to pay for moving equipment, it's going to America to pay for this, to pay for that. But that is the way that our economy ought to be benefiting from the mining industry. Now, copper mining has been the mainstay, so of course we are looking at copper mining, but any other mining activity should have the same formula. And this is where I think our policy has gone wrong. And when we look at economies that we try to emulate and say, yes, we wish we could be like that one, the one that's closest to us is South Africa. And South Africa have that law. You cannot export anything from South Africa without foreign currency coming from outside, coming into a South African bank to pay for it. You can't even pay for it with your friend in South Africa to say, this man has got a Congole with you. He imported a car from Toyota South Africa. I want to pay for it. Say, no. That car has left our economy. Therefore, we want Forex from outside.
Come into the country.
Not Forex from inside, not local currency. No, it must come from outside. And we are failing to make a policy that would capture that very, very important part of developing our economy. So in my view, I think the policy around the mining industry, around exports, needs to be relooked at and developed in such a way that the benefits of the resources can be enjoyed by this economy. And it's not saying that you are taking away the money from any investor. No, it's still in their hands, but it's in Zambia. And for that money to leave Zambia, you need a piece of paper. You can't wake up one morning and so I've got a girlfriend in USA. I want to give her $1 million. No. International law, monetary law doesn't allow you to do things like that. It should move on an invoice. It should move on a quotation. It should move on on documentation which is acceptable. Otherwise, it becomes tax evasion, it becomes fraud, it becomes money laundering, it becomes all those undesirable things that we see going on in other parts of the world. So in our case, I think that is an area that we need to look at very, very strategically. And then, of course, the implementation of the guidelines and rules on mining. You know, we are in an economic war. And this economic war started literally in the 1960s. That every nation is trying to build their economy at the expense of other nations. And we in Africa and parts of South America, parts of Asia, especially where economies are very religious, we tend to wait for messiahs to come and help us. We want people to hold our hands, be good. We call them donors, we call them developing partners, we call them friends. And these people are just laughing and saying these are sleeping. While they are busy talking hallelujah, we are going to take away their resources. And that's what's happening in the world. And we need to wake up and recognize that that is what's happening. So what do I mean by this? I mean that, you know, we must ensure that even if a donor comes and says to us, we want to help you at ZRA, we want you to go and tax the people in the markets. You know, there's so many people in the markets, so much money, you are not getting it.
We have a mechanism.
Yes, we are going to give you $10 million. We buy you new cars, computers, laptops, this and that, and you can get money from those people. They are just sending you off the most important route, the big route, which needs less money, not even $10 million, not even $1 million, is to tax the mining industry. To be able to get 20 heavily qualified accountants and say your job is to go into the mining industry where there are only 6 or 7 mines in the whole of Zambia. Go and tax them properly. Make sure that what they are producing is what they are declaring. Make sure what they're exporting is what they are declaring so that the government can get its fair share of taxes. But you see, that is not the target of our developing partners. They are saying, no, those are our companies which are operating in the mining industry. Leave them alone. Let's tax the chap who is got a Kantemba at Soweto Market. Let's tax the minibus company which is running up and down. And we are willing to finance you to do this. You know, this is sending us on what they call a wild goose chase. You know, you're chasing something which you never get anything out of it. Your ZRA officer probably earns what, 8,000-9,000 kwacha per month? You want him to go and collect 10 kwacha and 15 kwacha and 20 kwacha. Whatever he collects is less than his salary. So it doesn't even make sense to do that. You know, you might want to have a different mechanism where in a market you just pay a monthly sort of like a 20 kwacha fee to operate in the market. That becomes the tax to the government, where you don't have to spend a lot of time trying to follow through. So we have to look at how we implement some of the programs around the mining industry to make sure the mining industry is being monitored correctly. You know, this thing of exporting of copper concentrates, exporting of copper, but the same mines may be processing gold, they may be processing cobalt, they may be processing other minerals which are not accounted for. What assurances do we have that the minerals that are coming from this country and being exported are being captured and accounted for correctly? We don't. Because the people who are declaring are the same people who are exporting. We don't have a counter monitoring mechanism which belongs to the people of Zambia in the form of a regulator or an inspectoral unit. So I think we need to look at that. And of course, this means that the lessons that we have had from the copper mining industry over the last 100 years should tell us that this is where we have our gaps. And let's try and build capacity to fill those gaps so that any other mining activity is subjected to the same kind of oversight. You know, right now we are looking at copper as a big export mineral, but manganese has been going on for the last 10-20 years in a very aggressive way from the Mukushi, Serenje, and into Luapula province, Mansa. Yes. Cobalt comes out of the copper mining industry as a byproduct. Now the topical one which has just come up is gold. We're looking at gold, and of course gold is also going to have its own challenges. But without clear-cut policy and monitoring and oversight mechanisms, we may see that we are losing, the economy is losing, the people of Zambia are losing because we don't have robust systems to make sure that the benefits accrue to the people of Zambia.
All right. Now, you did highlight two critical points. Before we go for a breather, I want you to just make comment again on the first one. To me, it sounds a brilliant idea if all monies accrued from the sale of our minerals are actually circulated within our economy to grow our economy. Now, these are points that people that are listening in are wondering if at all government has considered some of those proposals that you make. Have you as Private Sector Development Association, have you tried to table that to the Ministry of Mines on how this can best be implemented, as opposed to having mineral wealth circulating outside this country, as opposed to having as much foreign exchange earnings in our banks as possible?
I think the private sector in generally has had a lot of engagement. And it's been with the Minister of Finance, because when you're talking about these things like export earnings and so forth, this is really in the domain of the Minister of Finance. So these discussions have been had with the Ministry of Finance. These discussions have been had with the Zambia Revenue Authority. These discussions have been had at all levels, where including members of parliament. When you are looking at parliamentary submissions, usually in the beginning of the year, the parliamentary committees are asking stakeholders to come and give their views on various issues. And these have also gone to members of parliament. And I think that really it's about courage. Do we have the courage as a nation to make these bold decisions? And sometimes I think we lack the courage. Sometimes I think we feel that the donor out there is so important to us that if we do something like that, the donor might run away from us and we will find ourselves with an economy that is declining. But, let's be encouraged that we had similar challenges in the 1990s. When Anglo-American Corporation, end of the 80s, end of the 1990s, Anglo-American Corporation owned our mines, all of them. And they decided that, no, copper mining in Zambia is no longer viable. We think we want to leave. Now, whether they left because they were genuinely feeling that the assessments were that mining in Zambia was no longer viable, or whether it was just a threat to the Zambian government to demand more concessions, and the government called their bluff. Calling your bluff means, okay, you say you want to go. And they left. And then we had Indian investors going in. We had Chinese investors coming in to take up the space that Anglo-American Corporation had left. We had investors from South Africa, New Zealand, Australia, Brazil coming in, and other European countries. And look at our mining industry since. It flourished. From the 1990s coming up, the price of copper shot up, where all the Northwestern Province had no mines. Now we've got 3-4 mines in Northwestern Province. Post Anglo-American Corporation, developed by new investors. So let's not be afraid. Zambia, we are like the king of the jungle, the lion that has been in a cage, being controlled by outsiders. Then one day they open the gate and say, Mr. Lion, you are free to rule the jungle. And say, no, I'm scared to go out there. I might be bitten by a snake. You have the power, you have the everything, but you are just afraid of your own shadow. And I think we need to stop doing that. Any mining company that chooses not to follow Zambian laws and wants to leave this country, let them leave. I have argued that the KCMs, when they were talking about shutting down, Mopani Copper Mine was talking about closing some plants. The government ought to be able to say, we as government are allowing investors to do investment freely. We don't want to get in their way. Allow them to invest. But mining is a national resource. What we don't want is an investor to come in and say, I'm getting a concession to mine here in Mufulira, but I don't want to mine. I want to put it on care and maintenance for the next 5 years. Then, my friend, pack up and go. We can't force you to run the mine. Yes, you are doing your own mathematics. You know what it costs. You are the business investor. You know what you are doing. If you feel it's not viable, please just pack up and leave, because there's another investor who's coming and saying, where that fellow says it's not viable, me, I can make money. Give me a chance, let me come in. And that's the role of government. The role of government is not to force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. Let them leave. Let new people come on board, like we did when Anglo-American Corporation left. So what we need to do is to make sure that our policies are clear, make sure that our rules and regulations on the accountability of export earnings to be accounted for in Zambian banks, so that that revenue is sitting in a Zambian bank and it's developing the Zambian economy rather than developing the Swiss economy or the British economy or whatever American economy. That those resources, those dollars should be sitting in Zambian banks, because those companies are registered in Zambia. They are accountable to the Zambian Revenue Authority. They're accountable to the people of Zambia, and therefore those resources should be start off by coming to Zambia where accountability is done. Then after that, we are not saying that you can't pay your Congolese outside. Yes, you pay, but it must be done through a legitimate paper trail, which Bank of Zambia approves. And those days when we had that statutory instrument that was, called a balance of payment monitoring statutory instrument, it was doing exactly that. It was making sure that Zambian revenues from copper export were being monitored properly, were being overseen to make sure that they are not going into wrong hands, they're not going into terrorism, they're not going into money laundering, they're not going into drug trafficking, because that money is accounted for through a banking system. So I think we need to be able to do that, and it takes some courage for us to do that. But believe me, when we are in a country that still has got a lot of resources, that the world is still interested in investing in, and let's be that king of the jungle to set up the right policies and the right rules and regulations for investment. But there is one thing that worries me.
Let me have you talk about that thing when we come back, since we've hit 10 o'clock right on the DOT. All right, I hope you won't forget.
I will not forget.
All right, so join us on the other side as we continue interacting on this particular program with the Private Sector Development Association.